So welcome everyone to our monthly Leadership Academy Communities of Practice. I'm excited to have you join us today. I know in the email I said that this will be our last, but I did get some great news this week that we're going to extend our meetings to at least April. So I'm excited about being able to continue the conversation and looking forward to putting together some more topics for your enhancement. Today, we certainly have a great program for you, two wonderful presentations from Eric Carter and Jackie Hyatt. So we're looking forward to that. But before we start, we usually have a roll call and we go by state. So we'll start with that. And if you're representing your state, if you'll unmute and let us know, we'll start with California.
Good morning, this is Amory in California. How's it going?
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. This is Priscilla Varela from California.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Devin, sorry.
Good morning, this is Devin from California.
Good morning, this is Cynthia from California.
Good morning, California. Good to have you all with us. What about Illinois? Kentucky.
Hello, everyone. This is Tony Perry with Kentucky.
Hi, Tony. Louisiana.
Hold on. Here.
And Susan's here.
Hello, hello. Montana. Next is New Hampshire. All right, we're going to New Jersey.
Hi, this is Elaine Katz from snowy New Jersey. We only got about 8 inches. We were supposed to get 1.5 feet, so that was great.
Only 8 inches. Good to have you, Elaine. New Mexico.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Eric Padilla from New Mexico. And just a heads up, I'll be in and out. I'm trying to multitask right now. So we got a maintenance man coming into one of the offices to try to turn on the heater for our office. So.
Oh man, good luck.
Good to see everybody.
Good to have you here. North Carolina. What about Oregon?
Jane from Oregon.
Hi, Jane from Oregon.
Hi, Robin.
Hey. South Carolina is next.
Hi, this is Cassandra.
Hey, Cassandra. Good to have you on today.
Well, thank you.
Virginia is next. And anyone that I missed that want to introduce themselves?
Peggy. See you, Peggy. Nice to see you.
Peggy Hell from UA Currents. Thank you for joining, Peggy. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Our first presentation is going to come from Dr. Eric Carter, and he's going to be sharing on a topic I know many of you have expressed interest about, putting faith to work. So we're going to turn it over to Dr. Carter. Thank you for being with us today.
You bet. It's good to be with you all. I appreciate the invitation. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Good. So I wanted to share a bit about our work at the intersection of faith and disability and employment, and share a little bit about what we have been doing around engaging congregations and helping being part of helping people forge that pathway to the workplace, to a job that matters for them. And the context for this project is something called Putting Faith to Work. It's a project that was funded about 6 years ago by the Kessler Foundation, and I know Elaine is on. And so I'll come back to a little bit about some of the resources that we have to share for any of you who want to implement this model or adapt it for your context. But just a little background on something, some of the things that set the stage or rationale for why we're trying to engage local congregations as part of the solution to the pervasive unemployment problems that we're seeing. So this will be very familiar to you. Obviously, we're all committed to the recognition that, like anyone else, people with disabilities have wonderful gifts and strengths and talents to share, including in the workplace. And yet we know historically unemployment, underemployment are pervasive. In fact, they haven't changed in substantial ways over the last several decades, at least for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we also know that many people with intellectual disabilities have limited opportunities for having valued roles in the community. And even at our very best, if we get everything right as a service system, we are not capable of meeting all of the needs of people with disabilities in our communities. We are called to and asked to engage local communities and natural supports as partners and allies in helping community members to thrive. So we need solutions beyond just the service system. I think probably you all would agree with most of those different things. But a few other contexts set the stage for this particular project. One is that for people with disabilities, like anyone else in the United States, there's no difference in the degree to which people with disabilities and without disabilities say their faith is an important part of their lives. So it's not important for everyone in the US, it's not important for every person with a disability, but it's no less important for people with disabilities. So many people are connected to a local faith community of some kind. So we know that. We also know, at least in the United States, that there are congregations everywhere. There's actually 335,000 places of worship, mosques, synagogues, churches, and other places of worship all around the country. If you looked at a map of Nashville, which I put on the screen, you'd find about 800 congregations in our area. Every little red dot is another congregation. And you could actually pull up your state or your city using the web link I've put at the bottom of this and pull up all the local congregations. So faith is important to many people with disabilities. Congregations are part of most or all of our communities, and those congregations are called from their theological basis to be places of welcome and support and belonging for people with disabilities. We put together a nice free white paper that articulates why congregations are called to be part of and supportive of people with disabilities. We also know that most jobs come through the power of personal networks. So it's people's personal connections that often are the things that unlock employment opportunities for them or become the avenues for supporting their employment in the community. So with all of that kind of as a background, I want you to think now about your local congregations a little bit differently than you might otherwise. Maybe you're a member of a local congregation, or maybe you're not. But we often think of them simply as a collection of people who share a common set of beliefs. But actually, congregations are much more than that. They're actually one of the largest employment networks in any particular community. If you walked into any congregation, you might find people like this who work at all different kinds of places throughout their community. They're connected to all kinds of businesses and places of employment, and might just be a person who could hire or has a connection to a job opportunity in that local community. So we know that congregations represent lots of places of business in a local community. We also know that people in congregations are connected to lots of other people in that community. So they're socially connected to lots and lots of other people. So they might be member of a chamber of commerce or a garden club, or be a prominent member of the family in town, or whatever it might be. And because each person, each of us, is connected on average to another 150 or 300 people, congregations may be places of connection to lots of other people who may know of those jobs. And the third thing I wanted to highlight is that congregations may be filled with people who have skills and talents and connections that could be valuable for people with disabilities trying to make that connection to the workplace. A congregation could be filled with people who are great at helping someone write resumes, who loves helping people figure out what their vocation or calling is, who works in HR and interviews people all day long and could do that for a fellow congregation member who has a disability. So all of this sort of sense of like congregations having relevance to people with disabilities, being present in communities and places of connection and perhaps support, led us to think about how do we tap into that to be one part of what we're doing collectively to improve the employment landscape for people with disabilities. So as I mentioned, we were funded by the Kessler Foundation to develop a model, a flexible model that local congregations could use to help their members connect to the workplace, and perhaps that service systems could use to partner with and ally with local faith communities. This project involved 4 different university centers from Minnesota, Kentucky, Texas, and here in Tennessee. And our goals were to look at this as a potential model for how congregations might support employment. We wanted to develop something that would be a really flexible approach that any congregation could pick up and adapt to their own culture and commitments, or that any local service system could pick up and use to partner with local congregations. And we committed to working with congregations to support up to 60 people with disabilities to find and maintain employment. So I'm not going to say a lot about all the specifics of the project. I just wanted to give you a flavor of what this model looked like, and then point you to some resources we have that you could use to adapt for your own work. We laid out a process by which congregations might sort of walk through this process, from seeing whether or not this was something they felt called to do, or whether it was a need in their local community, to gathering a core team that would figure out how that congregation would come alongside people with disabilities, discern their gifts and strengths and passions, and then make connections to the workplace. That team had to come up with a plan for how they would work in that local congregation, and then how they would reach out to people with disabilities who might want this support from them. We had to provide guidance to these teams about how they would have person-centered conversations around employment that didn't resemble what we do in service systems, but were more natural and aligned to the way anyone in a congregation might come alongside a member who's out of work and help them make those connections. And then we laid out steps for how they might connect with local employers, support job seekers, and then refine their process over time to make it work better and for more people. So every congregation that we worked with, and we worked with 25 in those 4 different states, began by forming a core team. That might be some of the clergy who lead that congregation. It might be members of the faith community who themselves are connected to the disability world as family members or professionals or special educators. It included some members with disabilities and just others in the congregation who maybe didn't know a thing about disability, but they knew the employment landscape in their community, or they were prominent business people who were well connected to that local community, and they could be part of sharing what possible employment opportunities existed. So every congregation forms a team. These teams I've put on your screen, just different pictures of what they've looked like. And you can see some range quite a bit in size, from 6 to 7 members to this one that was one of the largest that had nearly 20 people a part of that team. Each of those congregation teams then figured out, how do we extend this opportunity out through our congregation? So some of them made announcements from the pulpit about their willingness to support people with disabilities in finding jobs. Some put surveys in their bulletin insert to ask if you're a person looking for work, or you're a family member, you have a family member who needs work, or you're a person who might come alongside this team who has connections to local employers, or a knack for helping people find their gifts and callings, or a desire to use your employment skills for service of others. So a way of putting their faith to work in the service of people with disabilities. Others put announcements in their bulletins, PowerPoints, whatever that looked like in their local congregation, for how they shared out information about this opportunity. Some even created websites within their congregation's webpage that outlined this project and their commitments. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with AAPD's Interfaith Disability Advocacy Coalition, but they've done quite a bit of work around calling the religious community to be advocates for employment of people with disabilities. And they have a bulletin insert that some of our congregations used as well. So as congregations extended that invitation throughout their church or synagogue or mosque, then people with disabilities identified as being individuals who might want that help. And every congregation then did what we call the person-centered conversation with that person. They gathered the person with a disability, their family members, others that they wanted to be part of that, as well as people in the congregation who were just really well connected. And they had a person-centered planning meeting. They did it differently. It wasn't in a sort of sterile office like we often do, but it was really a celebration. And there was food and refreshments, and it was kind of like a party to talk about sort of what would be a great fit and who could help this individual. This person-centered planning meetings focused on 6 key areas. They had questions about the strengths, gifts, and passions that that team should think about. They asked about prior experiences they should be familiar with as they were considering possible jobs. They tried to discern what job responsibilities would be a really great fit for that person. And then they started to think about what are businesses and organizations in our communities that could use those strengths and gifts and passions. And then after identifying that, they started to think about who do we know in our congregation, or who are we connected through congregation members that might be those employers or know who those employers are. And then they identified the supports that person might need to be successful in finding and keeping that job. It's actually a really nice person-centered planning approach. The information that was generated during that hour to hour and a half long meeting was all recorded just on a single sheet, front page and back, where their strengths and gifts and passions were listed, their work experiences, their job interests, potential connections, supports needed, and then next steps as a group were all laid out. And these will be in the handouts that I can send out. But if you're interested in the actual sort of script that people use to guide that person-centered planning meeting, these are just what I'll put on the screen, are just the prompts that were used to elicit that discussion for people with disabilities and family members and others. So these are just kind of the sorts of questions that were asked. In many ways, it resembles a lot of the planning meetings maybe you have, but the difference is that the conversations often begin with this sort of, what's your calling as a person? What do you feel equipped or drawn or called to do? That's not a question we often ask in our service system planning. And the second thing that's often different about that planning process is it's filled with people who are not part of the service system. It's filled with ordinary citizens and community members who care about and love that person and are committed to them as a fellow congregation member, but are able to think outside of the boxes of formal services and eligibility and funding mechanisms and all those things, and can just figure out how to get someone a job the way they would help figure out any congregation member who doesn't have a job. Often then that team, taking the information that they learned, put together some sort of information that could be shared with employers. For a number of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the churches ended up, congregations ended up putting together one-page profiles. So here's an example for one of those individuals that just laid out the skills that they heard she brings to a job, laid out her prior work experiences, the ways people complement her strengths and talents and gifts, and the supports that they learned would be needed for her success. And then that one-page profile could be circulated out through members of the congregation or beyond to places people work or are connected to say, could you use someone like this in your workplace? So there's examples of those one-page profiles. Some congregations did reverse job ads, for example, for Katie, where they put together a seeking part-time employment ad that then just described Katie, who volunteers actively in her local congregation, but people never thought about her as a person who needed a job. And so this became a way that her interest in that was shared. Other congregations use this on, to post these needs on their blogs, or even to have videos that people shared about the kinds of jobs that they were looking for or interested in. So a lot of creativity there in terms of what these one-page profiles or resumes look like, because I think a lot of congregation members weren't thinking in the usual boxes that we often do in terms of how that information might be presented. They said over and over that the most important thing to know about a person is not their disability label or all the things they can't do and struggle to do, but rather the gifts and talents and passions that they might bring to the workplace. And that's what we needed to communicate through the congregation and beyond. So as I mentioned, we supported 25 congregations in developing this model and trying to figure out what it might look like for them. We also did a statewide survey, not directly as part of this project, but related, where we asked people with disabilities about whether they would like to receive support from their local faith community in the area of employment if it were available. And I think it's important to emphasize here, the part that is not shaded in is the percentage of people with disabilities who didn't want to turn to their local congregation for that kind of support. So a good third of people, this was not of interest to them. About a quarter said they'd be somewhat likely to tap into this support if it were available, and more than a third said they would. So my point is, we're not advocating this as the path to employment for everyone. but there are quite a lot of people who would welcome this kind of support and would welcome a congregation that they're part of to be part of helping them discern these things and make those connections as well. Well, once that planning was done, then connections were made to local employers. And it was surprising to us how many times jobs emerged, not through people at that congregation out in the community, but from people in that congregation who were in a position to hire. Katie, who you saw her one-page profile earlier, went to a congregation where the head of plant operations for a major university also went to that local church, heard about Katie's interest in working, knew exactly where she'd be a great fit because he's responsible for 500 or 600 jobs on that campus, and matched her up individually with a person who is one of his long-standing employers. And they became kind of a pair that worked together, sort of turning over dorms and other things for conference activities. The point was, she didn't need a job coach. She didn't need any service system to help with that because he knew her well, he knew his place of business well, and he matched her with someone that would be a strong fit. Other jobs came about through people who had just connections to local salons or assisted living places or things like that, where jobs maybe started as a volunteer experience and then turned to a paid position. And other jobs came like for Clayton, who's a passionate sports fan. One of the individuals who works in the CEO's office of the Nashville Predators hockey team saw that job posting and said, we know him, we know what a fan he is. Send him down next week and we'll make sure we hook him up with a job. They did, and then they committed to hiring another 10 people with developmental disabilities based on their experiences working with this particular individual. So my point in all that is that it's not an entirely different way of getting people with disabilities jobs. In fact, it's an ordinary way that lots of people get their jobs, through those connections of people who know and care about them. But we so rarely think about this network as one that could be tapped in for people with disabilities. Well, just one last big point that I wanted to make here is while we launched this project as an avenue, another avenue for connecting people to jobs, what we found it was really a way of connecting people to relationships. That as congregations came alongside their members with disabilities, many of whom they didn't know very well, they started to realize that they are persons worth knowing, who have friendships worth receiving, and who had lots of interests and passions and hobbies that align with theirs. And what often happened is people started getting connected to relationships. And so you could look at a congregation as also a network of employers, and you can also look at it as a network of people who have hobbies and passions and interests that might align with those of people with disabilities as well. It could be these kinds of interests. And so what we often find is that when we discovered someone also is a fan of this particular sports team, we not only tried to get them a job, but we also tried to connect them with 10 other people who are also obsessive fans of that sports team and introduce them into relationships as well. So that was what was something that maybe we thought of as a byproduct of this project, ended up being central to it. Well, the congregations all played this out in very different ways, and they were all very reflective about what this might look like and how they might do it better locally. And we really encourage them to think about what they're doing well and what they might be doing better or more of or differently. And so it was an evolving process, both in these congregations and in the congregations that have since adopted it in the years since. So after that 2-year project, we developed a manual that walks through how to do this step by step. And it illustrates how different congregations have implemented this as well. And so here's a picture of one of those teams showing off that manual very proudly, that they're featured in as well. And it's something that if you're interested in, you can access as well. It's available through our Putting Faith to Work website. This is not recipe work. It's really just a framework for thinking about how you might approach this in your own congregation. And hopefully for each of you, this is intrigues you, and you start to see, oh, maybe there's another pathway to employment beyond just thinking entirely about the service system, but other ways of tapping into these natural partners and allies and key supports. So I'll stop there, and I'll defer to you whether there's time for questions or whether you want to come back to that after Jackie has a chance to talk.
Yeah, great information. Do we just maybe 1 or 2 questions before we switch over to Jackie?
Yeah, it's a very innovative ideas. And of course, the church has a lot of roles to play in the society. I think these are very innovative for people with disabilities, that they go unrecognized. It's very powerful. Church has a huge role to play. And this is also has something to do with like a job club and a lot of information sharing, helping each other. I would like to learn more about it. That'll be helpful, very helpful.
Actually, nationally, about 10% of congregations have job clubs for
Yes,
their
okay.
members. They just
Oh.
tend not to focus on members with disabilities. And I
I
think
see.
people often think, oh, the service system is taking care of those individuals.
No.
And this is a call to say, no, you actually have the capacity here, and just think creatively about how to do it.
Excellent. There's a very new example. Excellent.
Yes, one chat comment, very useful, very helpful information. So thank you. Anyone else comments or questions? On the book, the Putting Faith to Work book, it's available. You mentioned the website.
Yeah, I'll pop it back in to the link as well. And also there's a number of other resources that can be downloaded from that website if you're interested. And I'm glad to answer any questions later if this intrigues you or you want to share this idea within your state. We're glad to connect with that. We're also glad to connect congregations in your community with congregations in our community who did this.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. Are you still providing those services of connecting and the coaching for the congregations that want to take up this project?
We've distributed now about 1,200 of these manuals all around, and so we don't directly support congregations because they'd be all over, but we're glad to meet with people to give them guidance. I try as much as possible to connect them to another congregation when I can, but yeah, we're absolutely, if someone's really wanting to figure out what this might look like, glad to support them in that area.
Thank you again. Great information, great resources, and I loved seeing those profiles of the participants. I thought that was really innovative, or even the reverse job ad. I thought that was really great.
Sure.
Thank you again. Up next is Ms. Jackie Hyatt. Thank you so much for joining us. And she's gonna
absolutely.
Yeah, share about employment as well, but this time for youth.
Yeah, so let's see, I'll share my screen here. And so one of the things that Robin asked was, she had seen a presentation that my colleague Ruth, who was not able to be with us today, but that we had put together earlier this year to share with some other states and teams. So I'm just gonna give you some strategies. I'm gonna talk a little bit about more collaboration and aligning your systems. And so whether you're working with youth or students or even adults, some of these same strategies will work across systems with whatever team you're pulling together. So I'm just gonna share some of those with you now. Let's see if I can. Okay, I set my screen up a little differently today, so I'm like, okay, where's my clicker? So one of the things that we really like to stress is when you're working with youth, that you're really we like to start with that end in mind. So where does the youth or student want to be as an adult? And they may not be able to actually talk about that in great detail, but they've got some ideas. And so really starting to look at where they want to be and where we can help them get to really achieve their dreams and their objectives for life. But we need to start earlier as well. So we know that kids, we start asking them what they want to be when they grow up, when they're young. And so really starting those conversations, but starting to support that for our youth with disabilities, and really having those conversations with the students and with the families, so that they start to have that vision that, yes, I am going to be working in my community, and that is an option for me. So we really focus on work is a key part, but how do we design that meaningful life? What makes life meaningful for us? We know that employment really is a key piece of that. research shows us that that's how people often identify themselves, is by the work they do. And so we really look at that, but we also want to look at how they're engaging in their communities and who their friends are. And I really liked what Eric was sharing too, because we know that those connections in the community are really important. So really looking at what they see as their happy home and where their sanctuary is, what is their health concerns and how can we, how's that supported? What are their choices and options? Really giving them and broadening that, and freedom and independence and being valued. Those are all things that we think of as we think about our lives and what makes life meaningful. So for services or service systems, really one of those key pieces that is so critical is that we have that interagency collaboration. And it's such a key component for secondary transition. And when I'm talking about secondary transition, it's that movement from high school to those adult environments. So looking at how can we strategically partner to support that happening more effectively. So oftentimes when we get together in teams, we're still kind of in those silos, and we may be talking to each other, we may be sharing information, but how can we really collaborate across agencies to really get the biggest impact for our work? And so what we've put together are some different strategies to build your local partnerships and really start to look at who in your community, or if we're talking about a state, who in your state can you partner with. But we've really focused a lot on those local partnerships in communities. So even if you're working from a state perspective, how can I start to help my local communities build those networks and those partnerships so that we really get a good outcome for our youth? So some of the people that, when you're looking at your community, that we really like to consider are your traditional agencies that you're looking at, secondary educators, really looking across the spectrum. So who's providing general education, and we've really started to partner a lot with our career technical education programs and really valuing those opportunities and those programs that students have to participate and learn skills. Our employers, and you can see that we've got faith-based organizations on this list as well. And I'm really seeing that connection as well as other community leaders. So really looking around that community to see who you can network with and who can help provide those supports and connections for students. So what are some of the benefits of building those local partnerships? And some of you may be able to just shout those out, but it really creates that efficiency by leveraging the capacity and resources. So we know that as we're working together, we're really able to connect, make sure that we're using all of our resources, not duplicating efforts. And as you start to build those partnerships, really uncovering some different ways you can partner that you hadn't thought of. It really does promote that coordination of services so that we aren't duplicating and really focusing on the, assisting the communication with students and families. So everybody's on the same page. All the agencies understand what each other's doing, and we're not giving conflicting messages. And we can really give a strong message to our students and families, because we really need those families, the family engagement piece. It's really very beneficial. And oftentimes we'll find that we can support the families to be more effective in their lives too, and to support the student through some other resources we maybe have connections to for that family. And then just support planning and what we like to think of as a seamless transition. You'll find as you're talking with folks, many of us have plans that we put together for a student, and they're not always coordinated, but it can get confusing for families and for students or youth, you know, about what plan am I working on? So having one plan and having that coordination across is really important. And as you get together in a team, or in a local partnership, you can start to have those conversations. I think it's important to understand that as we're thinking about transition, we're really fortunate that as federal laws have been reauthorized, WIOA and IDEA hasn't been reauthorized, but luckily the definition of transition services now aligns. So we're all working towards that same set of services and the same coordination. And so that helps if we can have that same definition and understand it. So it's all about that outcome-oriented process, promoting the movement, like I said, from school to post-school activities. And it really is driven by your student or youth. So really basing it and engaging them in that conversation and planning. We have a set of activities we work on, and those activities need to support that movement to those post-school environments across the board. So just wanted to bring that forward too, because it really does help having that coordinated and that same definition. So that would be a conversation to have to see what the perception of that transition services in your team would be. Some joint responsibilities that are easy to share across your agencies and within your team that we would look for. Assessment services, career development. We all have that, that role and can share that. Exposure to the world of work, skill development, connecting services and employment outcomes. So joint responsibilities that we have, it's really important to understand. And then those are all things that we can share. I think we don't always think about how another agency is providing that. So having those conversations is really helpful. One of the tools that it's very simple, that we started using just to start the conversation of how do we map those resources and identify our critical partners. So it's just basically sitting down and brainstorming who are some of those potential partners and how can they be engaged in that process and what is their role. And then as you start to uncover that, you'll find as we work with teams, we go back and they might have 4 people one month. We go back and meet with them again and they found some new partners. And so their team would have expanded. So knowing that you're continually reaching out to new partners is really important. So leveraging those strengths and addressing those gaps. The 3 areas that in transition that we're really focused on is employment, education and training, and independent living. So how are we using our services to best support students in those areas? So one of the big focus for the transition services is really that employment piece. So looking to see what your continuum, how you're providing the work-based learning. And we've just developed a continuum, basic continuum across the years of awareness, exploration, preparation, and employment. So we feel that having that conversation and talking about how we're doing that across those years is really important for the team and having that in place. We have a really simple mapping tool that you can start those conversations that breaks it out, some of the different activities that are tied to both IDEA and WIOA, pre-employment transition services in particular, but also the broader transition services that VR provides. So it's just a quick way for you to take an inventory as to when that happens and to start to build that continuum. I wanted to share some tools with you that you could use to do that. And then if you're mapping pre-employment transition services in particular, we have just a simple table. It's really helpful to identify who's providing the different services so that, again, there's not duplication of efforts and we're not supplanting resources or funds too. So it's another way to map that. And just, we have then, building on that information that you gather, one of the things that we've started doing is working with folks to develop a flow of service. And that's across state, local, and then for individual students. And just some ideas about how that's helpful. really using a local collaborative team to do that. And then the role clarification is really important so that you can start to look for where you can share resources as well as where there may be duplication, but also where gaps are. And you'll start to see when you map it out where those gaps might be. And then it's remembering that it's really a fluid document. You'll start at one place, and then as you design, it's not meant to be static. It's meant to be continually evolving as you start to develop new resources and uncover things for your community. And then I just wanted to plug that really starting early is important. As I'm going to show the tool, let's see. I'm going to go right to I'm going to click through a few of those. So what we've done is it's really just a basic template that we've used for a framework. And the first thing that you want to do is identify as a group what your desired student outcomes are across the ages. So what do you want students to know as they're moving through that high school experience and even before that potentially, and then moving into your adult environments? So what's important for those outcomes across those years? One of the things that we found to have a conversation about is how do students and how do we support them connect with the agencies and obtain all the potential services that would be helpful. So outlining those so we make sure we don't forget about a service that they may, and then talking through how that happens so that you have a plan about like VR may initiate something, but how can education support that to actually happen and get everything in place? And then identifying each one of the agencies' roles and responsibilities. And we've included families to really have a meaningful conversation and include some family members in your community in that conversation about how can families support their youth or student across those different activities. I've got an example of what it looks like when you get that pulled together. So this is an example. So you can see that they've just identified some basic outcomes that they want to achieve across the years. They've added in the connections that they would expect to see across those years, or they might, a student would have an opportunity to connect to different services. And then this is just vocational rehabilitation and education, just outlining their roles and responsibilities across those years to help the student achieve those outcomes. So it's really sitting down and having a conversation and looking at how you can support the student to reach those outcomes. And then understanding that dialogue is really helpful to those local teams to see who's doing what, to maybe identify those gaps and put together some things. And then what we found too, and we've heard from families, that as they're shared, as teams share this, either through an individual, an IEP planning for school or through individual plan for employment with VR, that families start to see what's really happening across the years. And we've had comments from families saying, I didn't realize that there were all these people that were supporting my child in this, or I didn't realize that this is what would happen and that we would eventually reach those the goals that we want or the dreams that we have for our child. So it's really helpful in communicating that and then mapping out for individual students what they need too. So we found that to be really helpful. I just threw in some strategies that you can use for working with families, really helping to have that dialogue. We've had put together some family interviews that really help to find out what their dreams are for their child. And then also for the professionals to listen to the families about what their partnerships and connections are in the community too, because we've uncovered some employment opportunities through those families and have approached, or maybe the families approached a friend of theirs that has some employment opportunities or own a business in their community. So it's really helpful in uncovering that as well. These are some resources that we have. Transcend was a partner, company I currently work for, was a partner in the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, and that was the project that I worked on through Transcend for the last 5 years. But you can go to the Transcend website and find several documents. The things I just shared, the tools that I shared with you are there. We created, through our work with the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, WINTAC and INTAC, also put together 2 really good resource documents, one for community rehab partners and how they would work with schools. And then it gives you all kinds of tools in there. It helps your community rehab partners understand their role. Like if I'm walking into a school, who do I go talk to first? And some strategies that way, and it gives them some tools too. And it's really focused on how can vocational rehabilitation support those partners to access schools and to really partner with schools in a different way. And then we also just released the Pre-Employment Transition Services, a guide for collaboration among state vocational rehabilitation agencies and education partners. And that has, again, all the tools that I shared with you, as well as, and you can customize those so that it reflects your community. And then also we have a little short video of introduction, and that's, you can find all that on the WINTAC website as well. The video is there. And then we have the resource mapping toolkit on the INTAC website. So lots of resources out there for you too. I just wanted to share those with you. Here's a guide that we developed as well, a guide to developing collaborative school community business partnerships. We did that early on with Rich Luking and some other folks as well. So that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. And that was a fast run through on that. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And I've got my contact information as well too there. So
thank you. Thank you so much. Great information and good to know about those resources. We have a copy of your PowerPoint. We'll certainly share that with everyone on our ProjectE3 website, and we'll email it out to all the participants. Are there any questions for Jackie Hyatt today?
Well, I understand that you worked with WINTAC and INTAC. So just one of the technical assistance center. But I'm asking Dr. Carter, did you work with state agencies or just by the congregation by itself?
Did we work with state agencies?
State vocational rehabilitation agencies?
There were examples of where members with disabilities were already connected to agencies, and they might have been tapped in for support. There were even a few examples where members of those people's support teams or agencies joined in on those planning meetings as well. So it didn't begin with a requirement of having them, but it tapped into them when they're available, which is exactly the way it ought to be.
Excellent. So regarding Dr. Hyatt, you were the contractor for INTAC?
We are one of the partners. So
partners, I see. Okay.
Yeah, multiple partners were a part of the project, including universities.
Sure.
Yeah, UNC Charlotte was the major coordinator for the project.
And also with the school district for transition students?
Yeah, so what we did was our charge was to work with state agencies, and UNC Charlotte and several other universities are partners in the next iteration of that collaborative. And I'll be moving to UNC Charlotte to work on that.
Excellent.
Yeah, so we'll continue the work. So there'll still be support out there for agencies that want to do that kind of work too. But we focus with state agencies, and through state agencies' work, we help them work with their local communities. So
sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. very interesting work.
All right, thank you both, Jackie. I appreciate the
You
information.
bet.
Eric, so much. We appreciate both of you for being with us today.
Thanks
Will
for
you
the
be able to share your PowerPoint with us, Eric, so we can share
Yep.
that out with participants?
Yeah, I'll forward that to you
Sure.
shortly.
Okay.
That'll be
Thank
very
you.
innovative. That'll be very helpful for others. And we're going to share with you the ProjectE3 website. We have recorded webinars on different topics, transitions, employment, and other issues. So that'll be helpful for each other. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kundu. I do want to say again that I know in the original invite for today's meeting, I said today was our final meeting. And so after that, I did have a conversation with Dr. Susan Flowers-Benton, and I'm excited that we're able to continue our communities of practice through at least April. And then we'll be providing some follow-up with the states to check on your sustainability plans, identify any needs as you're going forward and implementing those. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. After today's meeting, you will get an evaluation from UA Currents. I highly encourage you to complete the evaluation and let us know your thoughts about additional training topics, especially for the communities of practice. It's very helpful in the planning process for these monthly meetings. So our next communities of practice will be January 21st at 1 p.m. Central Time. So mark your calendars. And again, we have had some comments in our chat thanking Eric and Jackie for their presentations. Very useful information. We appreciate you being with us. We intend, I know Dr. Cassandra Sly-Conway says she's currently, you can hear me okay, my connection says it's unstable. Am I still with you? Yeah, so Dr. Cassandra Sly-Conway was saying she works with congregations in her grant. So I know even many of you are working with youth. So these are two very important topics for our group. So we really appreciate sharing of those resources. Any other comments before we dismiss? Hearing none, thank you again. We look forward to seeing you on January 21st, and we want to say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.